Roll in.
All right, so we're recording. We're on page 78 at the bottom. The halakha bra, we were learning that washing your hands by dipping it into water would not count as getting rid of the ruach ra, but would count, at least according to the poskim, it would count to allow you to pray or say Shema or any of those things. And so continues Rabbi David Yosef, and therefore, af al pi, even though she'im ein lo efsharut, that he has no other option, ella, rather l'sachsech yedav b'chli shel mayim, if you have no choice but to dip your hands or rub your hands inside of a vessel of water, yaseken, you should do that. That's what you should do. Ureshai achar kach, and you are permitted afterwards likro kriyat shema, to read Shema ulitpalel, and to pray Shmoneh Esrei. Mikol makom, but in any case lo yivarech al netilah zo klal. You should not make any bracha on this. On this washing your hands and by dipping it into a bucket. Shesafek brachot lakel, because when you're in doubt as to whether you should make a blessing or not, you're lenient. Sabah, safek brachot lakel.
So how's that printed? It's just a pig, a brachot, like I said.
Shesafek, when you're in doubt of brachot as to whether to make a blessing, lakel, you should be lenient and not make the blessing.
Yeah, I'm missing like the connective words there. Okay, so you have to select the doubt, the brachot. Okay. So when in doubt.
About a blessing, you just don't make it. I mean, when you have opinion that says to bless and one says not to bless, you err on the side of caution and don't bless. Okay, I'm looking here at the note in the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now we're gonna be angry at the Sfaradim tonight, okay? Equal opportunities. Let's read this note together. He says not to make a bracha, right?
Yeah.
But why? What's his conclusion? Berur halacha, the right hand column where it says Yud Gimel. See that corresponds to Yud Gimel at the end of our paragraph? Let's read this together. Hine af al pi shledat ha-Talmud v'ha-poskim, even though that according to the Gemara, the Talmud, and the poskim, our halachic rabbis, mo'ila netilah zo l'tfilah u'lekriyat shema, this washing works for tfilah and for kriyat shema, u'chmosh yitbe'er, like it will be explained, mikol makom, in any case, yesh lachush b'chayoteh bazeh l'shitat ha-Zohar HaKadosh v'ha-Mekubalim. One must take into consideration the opinion of the Zohar and the Kabbalists. She'ein netilah zo mo'ila klal, that this washing doesn't work at all. Remember, the Kabbalists don't hold that it works for everything except for reading of ruach ra. Rather, they hold it doesn't even work for Shema or Shmoneh Esrei. Kivan she'asur litpalel v'varech, because according to them, you're not allowed to pray or to bless kesheruach ra al yadav while the ruach ra is still in your hands. Vim ken, and therefore, yesh lomar, one should say, safek berachot la'akel. That when in doubt, we do not make a blessing. Because even though the Gemara tells us you should make a blessing, and even though the poskim tell us you should make a blessing, the mekubalim say not to, and therefore that's a doubt, and we don't make the blessing.
There's a real issue here of practicality for the typical Jew. It would seem like a Kabbalist doesn't travel or go places where they're going to be inconvenienced by not having the proper water source or kli to do the proper washing, but that there are people riding camels and donkeys, and they're in places where water is hard to procure, that to fulfill Al-Pi Kabbalah would be very difficult for
The Mekubalim led very different lives than the rest of the people. I once saw a post where somebody said the Baba Sali was the spiritual leader of Moroccan Jewry. And I wrote them an article, I wrote them a letter, but I never got anything back. I said it's a mistake. The Baba Sali was not the spiritual leader of Moroccan Jewry. The Baba Sali was one of the big tzaddikim of Moroccan Jewry, meaning we went for blessings and regarded him as a holy man. But regarding practical adherence to Torah and mitzvot, not the Baba Sali, Rabbi Mashash, Rabbi Shalom Mashash, Rabbi Yosef Mashash, Rabbi Berdugo, Rabbi Toledano, some big names, but not the Baba Sali, because the Baba Sali's way of life was not for the masses. The Baba Sali's way of life was for the Baba Sali. And the normal way of life was led by the Poskim. That has to always remain clear in us. There are two ways to live your life, but one is not allowed to opt to live like the Baba Sali until he reaches that level in which he knows that that's what he has left to do in this world, is to start keeping halakha like the Kabbalists.
So, does Moran actually address the issue in the Shulchan Aruch about whether it's a blessing or not?
Jack is asking $1 million question. That is now on the next page. Let's do this part together. This is the reason I wanted to read it. Because let's say you could prove that Maran says to make a blessing. Would you make the blessing?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
what do you think?
Sephardim should,
Sfaradim should, but
but here they're not. So that's why.
remember that rule?
So if I want to do
Wait, do you remember the rule
I
first?
have whom to rely.
Do you remember the rule?
When in doubt, you don't make a blessing.
When we're in doubt against Maran as to how to do a mitzvah, do we follow Maran?
We count them. We count, don't we?
No, yes,
Count
we
the
always
peoples.
follow Maran. Even if 1,000 rabbis go against Maran, we follow Maran.
Yeah.
Except,
So,
you were saying
Maran
this
is always going to be our majority.
but you said except in this case.
Except, say some Sephardic rabbis, when two rabbis argue with Maran as to whether or not you should make a bracha. Oh, then brachas are a different category, so we would go against Maran when it comes to blessings.
That's what it was. Yeah, there were two.
Is that what this rule reminds me of?
Selective.
Maran is Maran. If he's not your Maran, so don't follow him.
So barachot are rabbinical mitzvah. So are we doing the same thing for all rabbinical mitzvot or just for brachot?
Just brachot. Very good. See, but they see. I'll tell you. I don't want to explain their rationale because you can't explain one side and not the other side. Their rationale is as follows: everything else we follow Maran in, that's the way to go. But saying God's name in vain is one of the 10 Commandments. And if a significant number of rabbis, here being 2, argue with Maran and say, "Listen, you cannot make the blessing," we cannot just hide behind Maran and say, "Oh, we're going to make it anyways because we are Sephardic and we follow Maran." You have to take into consideration that some people would hold that saying God's name in vain. Saying God's name in vain is a big deal in Judaism. That's where they come from.
However, the problem I see is that, you have mitzvot that are measurable in time and space, and you have other mitzvot which are not. But this doesn't seem to be a mitzvah you can't measure in time and space in terms of kli, water. It's physical things doing physical
You've been bothered
actions.
about this since the beginning.
What's that?
You've been bothered about this since
Yeah,
the beginning.
because there is we talked about a mikveh has certain dimensions, certain amount of water, certain percentage of mayim chayim in it to make it kosher, which is also having a way of washing the body, right? And here it's like you're taking a dimension of something which has not even been completely defined, reach ra, and in the halacha at least, when maybe al-pi Kabbalah it's defined well, and we're applying that to something. We're taking something that's more intangible to something that's more tangible. That's the best way I can express it. Maybe you can express it better than I can.
Well, this idea of quantifying concepts in Judaism is actually a later invention in Judaism.
Even in Talmudic times where they talk about so many amot, Shabbat you can walk so many amot beyond the city, then after that you can't go further.
Zev's asking a good question. Zev's attempting to disprove what I just said.
Yeah.
And now I will attempt to disprove what Zev just said. All the measurements we gave,
Yeah.
right? You amot, right?
Yeah.
Well, give me Jewish measurements. Amot, se'ah, right? Tfachim,
Kin. Revi.
hin,
Or
okay.
units of time, like when we were learning brachot at the beginning.
Shod, zmaniot. So give me more like kizayit, like an olive, kibeta, like an egg. Meal, parsa, so all kinds of things. All of those are not. It's not like mile, kilometer,
Relative.
inches, centimeters, hours. All of those times are very natural measurements.
Yeah. But
Meaning-
that's how measurement all was in those days.
Oh, very nice.
Before the modern era, before we were digitized or
Atomic clock.
used, metric measurement, things were always more or less an inch. This.
Like, what is a kazait? So in Sfarad, they said, go pick an olive off the tree and figure out how much bread you need to eat.
Yeah, it's much
In
smaller than
Ashkenaz,
the
they
Ashkenaz,
started
yeah.
weighing things, volume.
Yeah.
And then some went by volume, some went by weight, some went by this, some went by that. How much water it would displace if you put it in a cup. Then you had rabbis started making measurements. So what is an amma? What is an amma? Tell me. How big is an amma?
It's supposed to be from here to here. 18 inches.
I don't know.
An amma is your arm, this part, from your elbow
Here
up.
to the tip of the.
So the rabbis-
right?
Recently have come to the conclusion that the median be'erach is 18 inches.
See, that's still not my point, though.
I understand your point. I'm going to get to your
It's
point.
a quality. I'm talking. It is a qualitative measurement as opposed to a quantitative. So
I'll
it's
get
still
your
a
point.
measurement.
I'll get to your point. Right now, what I'm trying to show is that all of the measurements used were very natural.
Yeah.
We then transformed those measurements, mostly those who were unable to access the things that we were discussing, to numbers, to equations, and then you suddenly have like a kazait, an olive, it's like 13 matzahs. How does a kazait go to like 13? I'm exaggerating. Yeah, it's like a whole matzah. You know how many olives you can fit in a matzah? You think they used one olive size of flour in that mixture to give you a whole matzah?
No.
It's a ridiculous idea. But that came from the conclusion that olives change the size. What do you mean olives change? That's because you've never seen an olive tree before.
Right.
Olives didn't change in size. When they dig up olives in Jerusalem today, and they have on the around the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the same size olives they are today. Sure, you have big olives and you have small olives.
The olive's very big.
So in Judaism, we always take the medium size olive, whatever is.
And the majority of olives are like very small. Very small.
That could be.
So the
The
Gemara
natural
mentions
olive.
zayit benoni.
Yeah,
Like when we say egg, it's not an ostrich egg. Or there are ostrich eggs. True, there are little quail eggs. But we're an average egg. An egg is an egg. And here, what you have is people today they're eating the size of like dinosaur eggs. They're going like there's a whole. That's not an egg though. That's only from somebody who was removed from the natural way to measure things. And unfortunately, those who will tell you today that an olive is the size of an olive, they seem to be crazy. What do you mean? You're a heretic? You don't know that olive is like 3 matzahs? Come on, an olive is... You want to be really strict, so you follow the strict opinion. You have to eat 2 kazites, 2 olives. That's what we do.
I was so relieved when you said that because I used to go to Seder tables and watch people take whole matzahs, crumble them, and eat them up within.
Oh, and
so
it has to
many
be within
seconds
a certain amount of
after-
time, right? That's
Yeah.
also a measurement, by the way. Yeah.
Instant heartburn.
Yeah.
Zev's question still stands, though. We're not really quantifying ruach ra, how you calculate it, how you measure it, what's getting rid of it, what's not. The things that we know for sure are the following. Ruach ra used to be very strong. However strong that was,
Beit HaMikdash time, you're talking.
yeah, even in the Gemara's time, yeah. And then Ruach Ra needed a lot to combat it. And Ruach Ra was very contaminating, very contagious. And we see the rabbis kind of peter out over time saying, just like the holiness fell, so did the Ruach Ra. So it's much weaker. So now when we deal with Ruach Ra, we're normally leaning towards the more lenient opinions.
So are you talking about like what, for example, when a person died in a house, all the vessels had to be
That's
broken?
too much. Here I'm talking about Ruach Ra.
Okay, so
I'm talking about, let's say you had a drink and you touched it or whatever. And so we said there are those who were lenient about such things. Why are you lenient? The Gemara says it's no good. Because you're taking into consideration the opinion that says that you don't really have such strong ruach ra to it. So it didn't. So what is not such strong? What does that mean? So is it a little bit strong? Did I get a little bit of my water? Ruach ra. We don't have. You're right. We don't have those measurements. We do have another measurement. To get rid of ruach ra, you have to pour a revi'it of water on your hand 3 times alternatingly. So if you would use less than a revi'it of water, it wouldn't work. If you would do it less than the 3 times alternately, it wouldn't work. And so we know there are certain things we do know. So that's the closest we have to quantifying these things. It's a mistake. People, they wash their hands with very little water. They're going to eventually not get rid of the ruach ra from their hand. But now, back to the halakha b'ra. Rabbi David is telling us, so if you do such a hand washing, dipping your hands into a vessel of water once, you got the revi'it, but you didn't have the vessel pouring the water on your hands. You are now good to go according to Shulchan Aruch, according to the Gemara, but you're not good to go according to the Kabbalists, and therefore, you shouldn't make a bracha. Let's see what he says on the next page. Birur halacha. Uchmo shekatavti b'siyata d'shmaya, like I have written with Hashem's help, b'chayotze b'zeh b'shut otzrot Yosef shebesof hasefer Siman Tet, like I wrote in my questions and answers otzrot Yosef, which is in the end of this book, Siman Tet, number 9. Vayen sham v'dok. And look there and you'll understand. V'omnam, but you should know, HaMagen Avraham, one of the main Ashkenazi commentaries of Shulchan Aruch, Katav, he writes, Shivarech al Netilat Yadayim, to make the blessing of Netilat Yadayim. Comes along a different rabbi. V'hisbir halevushei srad. The levushei srad says that's not what the Magen Avraham meant. He meant you make a blessing, but not the blessing of al Netilat Yadayim, rather the blessing of Dehainu al Nikiyut Yadayim, on the cleaning of my hands, but not the Netilat Yadayim.
Boy, what a head twister.
The Pri Megadim, over there, Nistapek, now he's in doubt, not just about whether you make a blessing or not, now he's in doubt, Im Hainu al Netilat Yadayim or al Nikiyut Yadayim. Which blessing should you make? Al Netilat Yadayim or al Nikiyut Yadayim? So now he's got a two-way safek. One, he doesn't know whether to make the blessing or not, and two, he doesn't know if you make the blessing, which blessing are you supposed to make? Aval b'mishbetzot zahav, but in the book, the Mishbetzot Zahav, Katav, he wrote levarech al Netilat Yadayim. You should say al Netilat Yadayim. If I am not mistaken, the Pri Megadim wrote the Mishbetzot Zahav. Someone Google this for me?
Someone what?
Google it. I'm going to look up Mishbetzot Zahav. You look up Pri Megadim. Megadim.
Yosef ben Meir Turim.
What other books did he write? Does it say there?
Okay, he wrote Pri Megadim,
Oh,
Porat Yosef, Gilad Vradim, Tebat Gomer, Shoshana Ha'amakim, Noam Megadim, Rosh Yosef.
okay. See, I've just answered the question. The same rabbi, the Mishbetzot Zahav, who had the question, the same rabbi, the Pri Megadim, who didn't know, should you make Netilat Yadayim, or should you make al Nikiyut Yadayim? In his book, Mishbetzot Zahav, same person, he wrote conclusively, you say al Netilat Yadayim. That's why we looked that up. V'chen kadvu Chaye Adam, and similarly to Chaye Adam, who was the first and foremost posek of the Ashkenazim before the Mishnah Berurah came out, Rabbi Avraham Danziger. The HaMishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah was written by Chavetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen Kagan. Shemvarech al Netilat Yadayim, that you should say al Netilat Yadayim in this situation. V'kadav b'Shaar Tziyun, and the Mishnah Berurah writes in his notes in the Shaar Tziyun, Shekein mashma b'Beit Yosef, that seems to be the opinion of the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo. These are not right. They're not little people who are quoting here that say to make the blessing. Some pretty heavyweight guys. Skip the parentheses. Ulam. You see the next line under after the parentheses and ulam. Ulam li'inyan halacha. According to halacha, nira, it seems to be shafilu im timtza lomar, that even if you can prove shekain mashma b'bet Yosef, that Maran himself says you should make a blessing. Mikol makom yesh lomar, you could just answer dehabet Yosef l'shitatei azil, that Maran is being consistent with his opinion. The svirale that he holds, the mevarech al nitila sheina mesira ruach ra, that you make a nitilat yadayim when you wash your hands in the kind of washing that doesn't get rid of ruach ra. You make a blessing. U'shkmo shekatav behedya b'Shulchan Aruch lehalan, like he writes explicitly later on in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's find that. It's in this Siman Dalet, but it's Chaf Bet.
That's about
110.
Tet.
Kufyud, 110. Maran says, "Im en lo mayim," if you don't have water, Yikaneach yedav b'tzror or b'afar or b'chol midi demanki, you should wipe your hands in dirt or on wood or on anything that cleans your hands. V'varech al nikiyut yadayim, you should make a blessing of al nikiyut yadayim. V'yo'il et tefillah, this will help you so you may pray. Aval lo la'avir ruach ra shalem, but it will not get rid of the ruach ra. What do you see Maran's opinion is here?
You change the bracha.
Well, that, but let's not bring a proof from that, because here he's talking where you're not using water. That's why you change the bracha. But what else can you prove from it? That's very good what you just said, and we're going to get when we get there.
It doesn't get rid of the ruach ra.
That even though it doesn't get rid of the ruach ra,
You make a blessing.
you make a blessing. Rabbi David Yosef, are you not one of those Sephardic rabbis who screams the whole day about having to follow Maran? So now Maran says to make a blessing. And all the Ashkenazi rabbis prove that Maran says you have to say a blessing. Notice the Sfaradim are eerily silent over here.
Because
They're avoiding the problem.
Why is it such a big deal for them to agree with Maran?
For Sfaradim, saying God's name in vain leads them to all kinds of crazy conclusions.
But it's a different blessing.
it's Kabbalistic, isn't it?
Sfaradim, again, remember I said the other night, they
Yeah,
get
it's permeated.
permeated into the Kabbalah. By Kabbalah.
Did we ever find out what the Ben Ish Chai said?
No.
We were going to look at that. Very curious.
Oh, that's a good question. Now that we know that it's... Oh, you don't even know what he did. Last night we did Parashat Toldos, right? Is what it is?
Olive or Told
Tildos.
No, he repeats the prasha. There's two. He goes through the entire Tanakh for chapter headings twice in his books of halacha. Very interesting.
He probably did a teaching cycle and then he did it a second year.
Right.
Yeah. I can't find it directly. Let's look in the Kavach. You just did. I'll explain to you what you just did.
As a Sephardic Kabbalist, I get to see how he holds. What could be more interesting?
But we couldn't find what he held about what we discussed yesterday. So we can look now, what does he say about Chavbet, about that page that we just turned to.
Juice.
Pulp free.
That's why it's called orange juice.
Let me read you what the KSH says. The KSH is pretty much the successor of the Ben Ish Chai when it comes to Kabbalistic halakha.
It's the Chafetz Chaim here.
The KSH, it's a similar idea. It's a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, but this one written from a Sephardic perspective. He says the following. If you don't have enough water to wash your hands 3 times, karaui, properly, he told Pam Echad you should wash once, and when you wash that one time, you should make the blessing. Hagam de lo mahani l'ruach, even though it doesn't work for ruach ra. Ki habracha lo nitkana b'shvil ha'avarat hatumah, me'al yadav bilvad. The only reason for washing your hands was not because of ruach ra. And in order to become holy in the holiness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, להעביר הטומאה מעל ידיו, על יזרח את המים טהורים מן הכלי, וככהן שמקדש ידיו מן הקיור, in order to, by throwing water in your hands, that rids you of tumah, like the Kohen did with the Ben Mikdash. Here it's interesting, he's differentiating between tumah and ruach ra. You break your heads on that one. ולכך מברכים, and that's why I say, אשר קידשנו, קידוש ידיים, די בפעם אחת, to do kiddush, like the mitzvah, is enough just once with water, says the KSH. And where's the source? You're going to tell me. Rabbeinu Zalman Besiduro.
Well, I was quoting the Chabad Alter Rebbe by
The Alter Rebbe of Lubavitch, in his Siddur, writes this halakha. That even though it doesn't help for Ruach Ra, it helps regarding tefillah, and therefore you make a blessing on it. Nobody fell out of their chair, huh? That's because it's
closing the circle.
It's a common thing for Sephardic rabbis of this generation and this generation in the book to quote the first Lubavitch Rebbe. They held it in very much as a big pasuk. But they don't call him Shneur Zalman. The reason being because when you write acronyms, you're big boys, I can share this. Raz. He doesn't write Rabbeinu, he writes Raz. Shaz, in Kabbalistic literature, is always used to refer to Shichvat Zera, seminal emission. And therefore they never want to refer to the Alter Rebbe as Rashaz. Sometimes Rav Peretz refers to him as Razash, so it could be the other way around. Zalman Shneur. But they were much more particular about the kavod of the Alter Rebbe than perhaps his own Chassidim were. V'kach katav ha'gaon Rabbi Akiva Eger. Similar thing. You'll never find them right. Normally it's Harav Akiva Eger would be Hey Resh apostrophe Ayin. Rabbi Akiva. They never write that. The Sfaradim always Hagura. Hagaon Rabbi Akiva. Why Gaon? He was brilliant, but you don't have to call everyone a Gaon. Because what does Hey Resh Ayin spell? Hara.
Oh, the evil.
The evil one. And so therefore they wrote Hagra. That way you can give him a gimel. It takes away that idea of being bad. Hagaon Rav Akiva.
Hagra, that's how we got.
Yeah, but the original is Hara.
Hara. It would be
Hara is the evil.
The evil, but Hara, like Harav, and then Ayin, Akiva.
You know, it's the whole idea of using an acrostic combining the first letter of the name of great sages. But sometimes if you do that, you come up with words that are not becoming of a great thing. And it's
exactly.
Repeating while you're learning hara, God will be hara, hara, hara. You know, it's like
hara, hara, hara. Hara,
hara. Hara.
And also could lead to a lack of respect on part of...
Right.
Like, you know, they have Rabbi Vadia from Bartanura. He got the acronym Hey Resh Ayin Vet, Hara'av, which literally means the hunger, the famine. Which is interesting because Ashkenazim, they write it that way, but they call him Harav. When you see Harav on Pirkei Avot can say, you know it's Rav Ovadia of Bartanura. Interestingly enough, it seems like the Sfaradim, when they say his name, even though we pronounce an ayin, we also call him Harav, not Harav. That way we don't pronounce his name as the famine, rather as the rabbi. Certain sensitivities. Today we live in a generation we're not sensitive to anything. And then they were careful of the things they said, the things they wrote, the things they thought. So the source for this also Rabbi Kiva Eger, also the Magen Avraham. But you have to make sure you use a revi'it of water. So we see here the Kaf HaChaim, the Sephardic rabbi, and he's saying, you make a blessing on Tilat Yadayim. I'm happy that I'm not alone. Baruch Hashem. Okay.
So the two rabbis who overrode Moran on the water thing, either being in the festival and, you can't say a blessing because you're taking God's name in vain, they would also agree that you can't say a blessing on if you put your hands in rock
Yes.
or anything
Yes,
else.
very good. Because they hold you need water 3 times.
Okay. So in other words, they disagree with Moran again.
Entirely.
Yeah.
So what Rabbi David is saying is follow Maran, wash your hands, but don't say the blessing and follow the rabbis who argue with Maran.
Yeah.
And now here's what he says. Even if you could prove to me this is Maran's opinion, he says the most probably is. Aval li'inyan halacha, back on page 79. Aval li'inyan halacha, but halachically, practically, kaim alan safek brachot la'akel, we say, when in doubt, you don't make the blessing. Afilu neged horat Maran Shulchan Aruch, even against the teachings of Maran in the Shulchan Aruch. Uchmo shekatav hachida b'shut chaim Shaar, like the chida, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai tells us that we don't follow Maran when it comes to blessings. But I don't understand. Look at this, what he writes here. Oh. We're in trouble. Not really, but we're in trouble. I'm struggling again. Let's keep reading, I'll tell you why. And similar to this, Pasak HaMa'amar Mordechai, the book Ma'amar Mordechai wrote, Linyan Mayim Apsulim Mitzad Etzmam Tet Dem Suda, the water that cannot be used for a meal, Shloi Varech Anem Klal, you cannot make a blessing in that situation either. When you have water that you can't use for washing your hands, you can't make a blessing on that water. V'lachen Afkan, and similarly here, Yesh Lachush L'Shitat HaZohar, HaKadosh V'Mekubalim, we must take into consideration the opinion of the Holy Zohar and the Kabbalists, Ve'en Levarech Klal, and you cannot make a blessing at all. Uvifrat, and especially Shemidivrei Kama Acharonim, that according to the opinion of some of the later rabbis, the Acharonim, Shehuva'u B'shut Otot Yosef Shebasov HaSefer, which I mentioned in the back of my book in section 7, he says, נראה שחוששים לשיטת הזוהר הקדוש, שאין לברך את עתידיים שרית כל זמן שרוח רע עדיין שורה על ידיו, that they are of the opinion that you follow the Zohar in this regard. V'chen pasak b'nidunenu, this is the $1 million sentence here. And this similarly paskin the rabbi, b'kaf HaChaim. The rabbi that I just told you said you should make a blessing. A few pages before in Mem, he says you do not make a blessing. He says because we don't make blessings when, even if it goes against Maran, even if it goes against the majority of rabbis, we still don't make a blessing whenever we're in doubt. And it turns out that he wrote this here, assuming that you would know that everywhere else where he says you should make a blessing, he's only saying it in the name of the Ashkenazi rabbis who said so, not himself. So I don't have a proof from the Kaf HaChaim. I take it back. But I still don't agree with Rabbi David Yosef.
So, is it conceivable that one cannot draw down Kabbalah Zohar for every halacha?
What do
If
you
you read the writings of, for example, of the Baal Tanya, and he says that halacha is Kabbalah in Atzilut, I think he said it was.
Okay.
So that it's like a mirror world of halacha. But that would mean that you could apply Al-Pi Kabbalah to every single halacha that exists. But we don't see that practically happening.
Because we don't believe that you're allowed to do that. Practically. But there could be those who live their life like that. There could be. And here's the problem. The problem is here we are Sfaradim, saying we follow Maran, and we don't follow Maran. The Ashkenazim here, they're following Maran against the Zohar, and they're doing right. And let me tell you, when I have, remember this is time to share this. The Mishnah Berurah, the book Mishnah Berurah, Rabbi Chavetz Chaim, is not a simple book of halakha. What do I mean? In the Ashkenazi world, everyone learns Mishnah Berurah. But it's like looked down upon to learn Mishnah Berurah. You might not know this. But there's a book called... Remember I told you yesterday there was a book that was written and Rembrandt painted a painting of the author?
Right.
And I ordered it from a used bookstore. This is the book, and that's the painting from Rembrandt. You'll see it even has captions in Latin on the bottom. I might pass it around. Take a look at it. So...
That's like Tycho Brahe being close friends with the Maharal.
So the Mishnah Berurah is a running commentary on Shulchan Aruch, and we love this book. Chavetz Chaim. There's a book called Aruch HaShulchan, which was written around the same time period, by Rabbi Yechiel Michael Epstein, the one I told you who came from Morocco, his family Ben Benishti, and then he became the leader of Ashkenazi Jewry. This book is much more intense, much more deep, much more pilpul, like, change it, this opinion, that opinion. We learn it a lot also. The question is, when these two contradict, who do you follow? So, the Chavetz Chaim prayed his whole life. He says, very often he would pray, may I never be the posek of the generation. He didn't want to have that title. And so many people say that no, when it comes to halachic disputes between the two, you must follow the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Epstein. So the story is told that Rabbi Aaron Cutler once went to a Torah Masorah convention. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood. He was a Torah Masorah convention. And most rabbis come to things with books. They have a book they read while everyone else is blabbering about the world economic crisis or whatever else. And he came with a Mishnah Berurah. And one of the other rabbis said, Rav Aaron, you're not embarrassed to be reading a Mishnah Berurah publicly? Don't you know that the Mishnah Berurah, he himself prayed that he shouldn't be the posek of the generation? And he said, you're right. He prayed that he should not be the posek of the generation. And he was answered, because people like you don't learn his books. He said, but, he never prayed that he should not be the tzaddik of the generation. And therefore, he was the tzaddik of the generation. He said, and that's why I bring his books to the Torah Masorah convention, because I feel that if we need the blessing of a tzaddik anywhere, it's right here.
It's right here.
And that is the opinion of Rav Peretz. Rav Peretz and the Mishnah Berurah are like inseparable. Even though very often we don't follow the Mishnah Berurah, because the Mishnah Berurah follows the halacha against Maran. Okay, so he's being fair. We follow Mishnah Berurah when it explains Maran in a certain way, but not when it disagrees with Maran. But when someone else comes to interpret Shulchan Aruch, Maran, and the Mishnah Berurah comes to interpret Maran, most often than not, Rav Peretz will tell you, stick with the Chavetz Chaim. He knows what he's talking about. He's big shoulders to rely on. And if the Chavetz Chaim here says to make a bracha, I'm almost positive I would call Rav Peretz tonight and I would ask him this question, he'd say make a bracha. Like, I'd be very surprised if it wasn't. Be very surprised. Especially here when you can prove that Maran himself holds you make the bracha. Especially here. It's one thing if the Mishnah Berurah says, Maran says you would make a bracha, and the Chavetz Chaim says, no, Maran says you don't make a bracha. So maybe then I'd say, listen, I'm Sephardic, I like to rely on the Sephardic rabbi's interpretation of a Sephardic book. But here the Chavetz Chaim, everyone agrees that Maran says to make a blessing. Just you are saying that you have some rule where you don't always follow Maran. But here I want to follow Maran, And it seems like the big guns from Ashkenaz are all making the blessing, so we should follow that opinion. My personal opinion. So if you want to add into your note above, next to Yud Gimel, just write, but we hold that you make the blessing.
So the problem is that basically it's a logical connection between, basically if you can say a blessing after you put your hands in dirt, you could say you should say a blessing because you put your hands
In water. Both of them don't get rid of the Rech Ra. That's the common denominator.
I understand, but the thing is, Moran didn't say anything about blessing in the vessels of water. He only said it in the dirt. So we're making a logical extension to say if he could do it in the dirt, you could do it. You should do it in the water.
Right. Though Maran, it seems that not here, but in the Beit Yosef, he does pretty much put it out there that he holds you would make a blessing. But when he wrote down in Shulchan Aruch, he didn't write that again.
Yeah.
He assumed that we would know that.
Well, is that why on the previous page Moran says, I don't really know, and then later on he's...
Well, he doesn't know if it gets rid of the Rech Ra or not.
Oh.
Because it's water. By the sticks, he knows for sure it doesn't get rid of the Rech Ra. But in both cases, it's the Kabbalists who are holding us back. Not the Poskim. We have a clear road, and we have a road that we're not familiar with yet. So why not just walk on the clear road? There's like a toll route. No, we can't pay the tolls yet. We can't afford it. Huh? We'll get there.
For example, in case you Sephardi, but in
God forbid.
some halachot, you see that Ashkenazi halacha makes more sense. Or the opposite, you're Ashkenazi, and in some cases you see that Sephardi halacha makes more sense. Can you adopt this and do, some Sephardi, some Ashkenazi?
Makes more sense,
or if
meaning...
you're Sephardi, you have to...
Makes more sense, meaning what? Makes more sense because it feels good by me? Or makes more sense because it fits more naturally into the way we paskin halacha?
Or, for example, I deciding for myself just to make things easier, follow Maran, whatever everybody says, and
That's the right attitude. But we're seeing here the Sfaradim are deviating from Maran.
yeah, but Ashkenazi no.
Right.
So, for example, can I do in this case?
Right. So like my second example, which is that the way that Ashkenazim are following halakha here is more naturally in line with the way you are posek halachot. You decide halachot. And here's the answer to the question. I don't agree with Sfaradim that you have to be Sephardic. And I don't agree with Ashkenazim that you have to be Ashkenazi. I believe that there are times where one is right, one is not. I believe there are times where there's a standoff. Both are pretty obviously right. So which one do you follow? There, most people would say, I'd like to just keep doing what we've always done. Because in my family, that's what we always did. And both options are valid, so why switch over to something that may or may not be valid, if my opinion also may or may not. There are times where it's a tie. There are not times where it's always black and white. Those times, that's where tradition comes in to tell you which way you should go. That's where minhag is important. Minhag is not important when it goes against halakha, because who cares if the minhag goes against halakha? Get rid of the minhag. That's not the validity of it. Minhag is where both options are accurate, and now you don't know which one to choose. Then there's something else. Just because you were born to a family that came from a Sephardic country, you were born to a family that came from an Ashkenazi country, doesn't mean you always have to follow the Ben Ish Chai or Rabbi Ovadia Yosef or the Chavetz Chaim or Rav Elyashiv. It means that, assuming you're a Talmid Chacham, not a person on the street, which here we're Talmid Chachamim, you see that here the Ashkenazim are clearly following Shulchan Aruch. And the Sephardim, for a reason that's fair, it's Sephardic tradition to deviate from the Shulchan Aruch when it comes to brachot. But you chose to follow Maran, not to follow the Sephardim. In which case, why do you have an obligation, just because you're Sephardic, to follow the Sephardic rabbis, when here the Ashkenazi rabbis are more correct? And it goes both ways.
Okay.
And if we
I think
thought...
my motivation is, like you said before, that why should it be Sephardi and Ashkenazi? Why can't I create my own halacha with a mixture of both?
Because then you're going to have to...
Global Jew.
You're going to have to answer the question, when do you pick and choose? And very often you'll get into a situation where most people don't understand. You'll be following one opinion here that's Sephardic, one opinion there that's Ashkenazi, that are both directly connected to each other and both contradict each other. I'll give you an example. According to one rabbi in the Talmud, you can't pray mincha after like an hour and a half before sunset. Palag mincha, you have to stop. I don't know if it's exactly an hour and a half, but it's a significant amount of time before sunset. According to another rabbi, but according to him, an hour and a half before sunset, you can already pray Arvit, right? Because according to him, if you can't pray mincha, then now it's time for Arvit. According to most rabbis, though, you can pray mincha until sunset, but you therefore can't pray Arvit before sunset, or before 3 stars come out, depending how you read that piece. And look at what most communities do. Most communities end up praying mincha after that hour and a half period, like the rabbi who says you can pray until sunset, and then they pray Mariv Arvit, like the rabbi who said you couldn't just pray mincha, and then they pray Arvit early. So they're praying mincha too late for the rabbi who says you can pray Arvit, and they're praying Arvit too early for the rabbi who said you can pray mincha. So Maran at the end says, okay, because the Gemara there, in that specific case, didn't give a conclusion, so you can rely on one opinion for mincha and one opinion for Arvit. I don't like it though. Maran himself doesn't like it either. He says a real HaShamayim would pray Arvit later, right? That's just what he would do. But the bottom line is that very often you can get yourself stuck in that kind of halakha, where you're doing one thing, thinking it's Sephardic, and the other one thinking it's Ashkenazi, that they have no connection, but really they do have a connection, and if you really understand the root of the halakha, they're mutually exclusive. You can't pray mincha now according to the second opinion, then you can't pray Arvit then according to the first opinion. And that's why we don't pick and choose. Because consistency is a very big Jewish trait. You can't pick and choose. Not because it's fun and whatever, because very often you can lead to more problems than you're actually trying to solve.
Okay. But the motivation, follow Maran no matter what, is good enough to
Absolutely.
match.
Maran, if we understood only who Maran was, we wouldn't even... Yeah, we're obsessed with Maran. It's okay, we're allowed to be. It's a pure form of halakha. It's like the Maran and the Rambam. Those two, it's a shidduch made in heaven. If the world followed Maran and the Rambam and just left everyone else alone, the world would look like a different planet. Jews would be happier people. Mashiach would probably be here by now. All kinds of things would be different. But we don't. That's how we keep life exciting. Baruch Hashem. I say you don't have to get stuck in this Ashkenazi Sephardic thing. It's not. It's sometimes Ashkenazim are right, sometimes the Sephardim are right, sometimes the Ashkenazim are wrong, sometimes the Sephardim are wrong. You have to know how to look for that truth when it happens. I have a list of things Sephardim do wrong. That we do like Ashkenazim. You have to know these halachot. They're important halachot. They're Kiddush. During the Shabbat day, Sephardim do wrong. Halel, Sephardim do wrong.
There's a whole paragraph.
Yeah. Sephardim are much quicker to say God's name in vain, to do it wrong. Sephardim like to swear a lot. Not curses. Swear like I promise, I swear. It's in our lexicon. Ethnically Sephardic, at least. It's a problem. Ashkenazim are very careful never to say such a thing. Never to do such a thing. Like, everything is a bli neder. It's like, oh yeah, I'll come to the car, bli neder. But you're in the car already. Why did you say bli neder? Just there, you don't have to say bli neder. But there's something very special about that being careful. And I'm not stereotyping. There are Sephardim who are very particular and Ashkenazim who weren't at all. But there are definitely areas of halakha where we did things that are mistaken. No, it doesn't. Okay, we learned. Baruch Hashem. Hashem put us all back together in the last 65 years so we can learn from each other, not so we can keep doing things separately from each other.
Except that the Sephardic thing has been highly sublimated culturally to.
What do you mean?
Well, we've discussed this before.
Like we were talking about yesterday with the
Example,
Shlamis.
Right. And where this town you have 9 rabbis of Sephardic origin, of which only 1.5 are actually practicing Sephardic.
1.5. It's true. That's true. It's a problem.
And
See, the problem is not theirs. See, those rabbis, and I can't really say this on record, but it's not. I'm not saying anything bad, Barry. So don't worry about it. Those rabbis found their inspiration. Instead of finding it in the Sephardic community where they should have found that inspiration, they found it in other communities which actually gave them the inspiration. My wife asked me, she's like, Yoni, why are so many Sephardic people Chabad and Breslov?
Right.
It's like, what happened? Like, everyone just decided to go to Uman, Rosh Hashanah from Iraq and Morocco. They made Aliyah to Uman. Like, what happened? I said, here's the thing. Where Sfaradim in the 40s and 50s became Lithuanian, and therefore got rid of the spirituality, got rid of the open-mindedness, got rid of a lot of the things that Sfaradim got rid of in order to become mainstream Lithuanian. The singing, the dancing, the emotions, the beautiful side. The other Sfaradim, listen, we're looking for spirituality, we're looking for singing, we're looking for emotions. So where do they go? The Hasidim are the only people who offer that. And the Hasidim are offering to the Sfaradim what the Sfaradim should have been offering the Sfaradim. And that's why they all become Hasidim, because there's something very Sephardic about Hasidut. Do not quote me on that. There's something very Sephardic about Hasidut. It's like the most corrupt thing a person could say. It's a good saying, though. It's true. Sfaradim and Hasidim have a lot in common. What? Sidur, customs, halachot. I once told somebody in my wife's family, I said, if the Hasidim just stopped hating the Sfaradim so much, I said, we could have got rid of the Lithuanians a long time ago. Together we just overpowered everybody.
Careful now.
I'm being very careful now.
Yeah, I'm very careful.
But the truth is that kind of Baruch Hashem that we didn't get along, because that way everyone has their share of this portion. But that's why there's so many of them. What we're trying to do is to bring back a traditional version of our Masoret, which should be appealing to both cultures, not just to Sfaradim and not just to Ashkenazim. Let's read the last 3 sentences so we can call it a week. On 79 at the top. And if afterwards you found water, like good water, water that you could use in a cup and not just dipping your hands in.
Potable water.
And you can wash your hands with them from a cup 3 times alternatingly. You should go back and wash your hands. To get rid of the Ruach Ra and make the Kabbalists happy. But in any case, you should not make a bracha at all, on the second washing. Unless you didn't have such a long time between the 2 washings. Forget the last sentence, it's only according to Rabbi David. And those who follow this kind of halakha, why don't you make a blessing the second time? Halevy, Rabbi David, you told us not to make a blessing the first time, so now we should make the blessing, right? So you tell me why not.
You've already done the action.
It's a corrective rather than
Well,
a
if you already made the blessing and it was correct, then...
You didn't already
then
make
you
the
did it
blessing.
already.
No,
So if you
because-
do it again...
Oh,
What?
Because there's doubt.
No, so if you do it again, you're taking the name of God in vain.
but he didn't make a blessing the first time. Remember, you can't make a blessing the first time because
Because you didn't
Be-
make
You didn't
it
have water.
from Ruach Ra, you made it from for tefillah, but not against Ruach Ra.
yeah. So
That's why you didn't say brach. So now you do it correctly 3 times.
so why do you make a bracha now?
Why
Because
do
you do
you?
it for Ruach Ra
You're saying you do?
You
with
don't.
bracha.
You don't.
I agree with him now that you don't make a bracha.
Because you're doing one to correct the other. Is what I
Not because of that. That's a good point, but not because of that. Let's take it
Because
from
maybe
the
the
top.
first washing was valid.
Oh, because the first washing according to the Peskim was valid. And therefore, you were saying that?
Yeah,
Okay, then I didn't understand
No,
you.
it was
Oh.
valid for tefillah, but not against Ruach Ra.
Right, but that's okay.
You're saying bracha first time in the morning when you're doing Netilat Yadayim for Ruach Ra, right?
But you're taking us too far away. Good, but you're taking us too far away. This is the correct attitude over here. The first time you washed your hands, really you did a mitzvah according to the poskim.
Right.
And really you should have made a bracha, like us. But we don't because we're paranoid of making brachot. So the second time, of course you wouldn't make a bracha, because it's obvious that what you're doing now is not the mitzvah. You're just doing it to get rid of the ruach ra,
And
which could be
therefore
what you're saying it's a corrective measure.
And therefore you're saying bracha in vain.
And therefore the second time you'd be saying a bracha in vain.
Yeah.
So, our dearest friends, why wouldn't you just make a bracha the first time? Because you see from the second time that really the first time worked. By the first time he's worried about the Kabbalists. By the second time, he's worried about the poskim. This is halakha that's not consistent.
What if I'm worried about ruach ra?
But ruach ra itself wouldn't warrant a blessing.
Yeah.
Because it's a Kabbalistic idea. And here you have it. That you cannot just read halakha, yes, no, do, don't. You have to understand where it's coming from. You understand where it's coming from, suddenly everything starts to make sense, or it all gets very confusing. Like in this situation. And therefore, here's what I suggest. Make a bracha the first time. You obviously won't make a bracha the second time, because the only reason you're washing your hands the second time is according to Kabbalah, as a corrective measure, so that I wouldn't even think you would make a bracha then. So why does he say if it's close enough, you can make the bracha? This is according to the opinion of Rabbi David Yosef, or the poskim that he goes according to, that you can make a blessing after you wash your hands. And so if you wash your hands in the morning, and then 10 minutes later you wash your hands again, so that's still within the same amount of time that you could have made a blessing, either after the first one or after the second one, so it's good to go. That is not a valid approach in our books of halakha.
The morning, halachic nitilat yadayim for tefillah requires halacha. And we just adding the
Ruach ra to it.
ra to it.
Exactly. Technically, if you just wanted to watch once, you would get rid of everything except for the ruach ra.
That's why I'm asking.
Yes. This Thursday is what the non-Jews call Thanksgiving. I don't care if it's American, if it's not, or this. Let me tell you, go to whatever dinners you want to go to, eat whatever turkeys you want to eat. Do yourself a favor. Say that it's for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not for any Thanksgiving. It's not for any. It's not forbidden to celebrate Thanksgiving, but it's also not permitted to celebrate Thanksgiving.
It's not permitted to.
Yeah, Thanksgiving is a good thing. Say,
What did you
thank
say?
to
It's not prohibited, and it's not permitted.
It's not a Jewish feast, that's why.
So,
Rabbi Halevy used to talk about Rabbi Kotler, I think, was saying, like somebody asked him, Thanksgiving, if it hadn't already been invented here, the Jews should have brought it out. Should invent it or something like that.
There's something that puts a question mark in my head
Yeah.
when all the Jews start celebrating Thanksgiving. It's not prohibited. Don't listen to. I'm not like the rabbis.
It makes it
prohibited.
seem like they don't have their own holiday.
But also, it's not permitted. For example, don't give me that, but I'll give you that. Like Achashverosh's meal.
You're right.
We had to go to Achashverosh's meal. So Lubavitcher Rebbe, one of his sichot, proves halachically we had to go. Because if we wouldn't go, the statement that we're making is a bad statement. But when we were there, we shouldn't have been celebrating as Achashverosh guests. Rather, we should say we're here because Hashem told us we have to be here, not because we really think Achashverosh has what to celebrate for. So that's what I'm saying. Thanksgiving
didn't celebrate Thanksgiving to Borei Olam, right? He just celebrated.
I'll give you a mashal, a parable, not a exact comparison. Mashal. It's like when they asked Rabbi Yishmael, can I study Chochmah Yavanit, the Greek philosophy, Greek wisdom? He said, did you finish that in Torah? I finished that in the whole Torah. I said, okay, so I'll tell you. You're allowed to study Greek philosophy in a time where it's not day or night. Find a time that's not day, find a time that's not night, then you can study Greek philosophy. As it says, you must study the Torah day and night. So when you find a time that's not day or night, you can then study Greek philosophy. Everyone should have a beautiful evening.
yeah, so are you going to have people over on Thanksgiving?
There was a good Facebook cartoon today.